Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Inside the Big Design Studio. I'm Brandon Ward, your host with Project UX, and today we're sitting with Alesha Arp from the Mind Research Institute. She's a senior UX researcher there, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the work she's doing. So welcome, Alesha. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the work you're doing as a researcher at the Mind Research Institute, about the products you're using, who they're for, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. The Mind Research Institute is a neuroscience, education, and social impact organization. We are a nonprofit. Our flagship product is a mathematics software that is used K-12, but the interesting thing about it is that it's visual. It teaches with animations and visual feedback before it ever brings numbers and symbols into the mathematics.
So would you say that the visuals are sort of like a visual story problem?
No, I would say that the visuals are used both to give conceptual information of the mathematics that the kids are learning. So if we think about the fact that, okay, so if we were going to learn procedurally, we would have a math problem written on a piece of paper that says 1 + 1 is 2. Mm-hmm. If we think conceptually, we think, well, I'm one person, and when I add you, that's 2 people. And with those 2 people, we magnify and intensify what we're capable of, right? So with the feedback that is given in the games, students are actually given immediate feedback. It doesn't just give them a big old red X, like 1 + 1 is 3. No, you don't get a big old red X. Mm-hmm. You get animated feedback that illustrates not so much that the answer was wrong, but what that feedback shows is where the mathematics sort of fell apart. And then it lets kids think through the perception action cycle. When you do something and you get a result and you learn from that, through the perception action cycle, they learn the mathematics.
That's really cool, and it actually, anecdotally, it's the way I try to work with my 7-year-old son with his math. I had my son calculate what's 20 times 1,000, and he sat in his head. He was doing the math, and I'm like, stop doing the math. How many thousands are there? When I say there are 20,000, and he's like, oh, there's 20. I'm like, so what do you think 20 times 1,000 is?
Right.
20, and trying to think about it that way. So what is the neuroscience behind that? Because that was just something that made sense, and I kind of made up on the spot to try to help a 7-year-old cope with his
and you
brother.
were spot on, because the neuroscience of it is that that's how our brains learn, right? Our brains learn by we're presented with a problem. And in this case, it's a mathematics problem. Mm-hmm. But we're presented with a problem, we take an action, and then hopefully we get feedback and not a big red X. We get feedback on that action, and then we learn, if we attend to that action, we learn from that result, from whatever happens, right? It's like, okay, I'm not so graceful. It's like me speeding through a room and bumping my toe. Right? To the point that I've broken one toe 13 times. Oh. Eventually, at some point, the perception action cycle set in, and I quit breaking the toe because I learned to not go through the room at that speed. That's the perception action cycle. In mathematics, when you see the animation in the games, when you watch the feedback and the feedback responds to the answer that you selected, and then you pay attention to why that selection didn't complete the animation, there's your hint. So that's where the neuroscience comes in. It's that use of the perception action cycle. And with repeated use of the perception action cycle, and when students are challenged to struggle productively, they become better problem solvers. So it's not just rote memorization of 1 + 1 is 2. It's fully understanding that if I have one thing and I add another thing to it, I have 2 things. Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. I just finished a book called How Children Succeed. Children are more likely to succeed in school, in college, in life when they develop the ability to think critically, to solve problems on their own, to reduce their own stress levels when stressed from fight or flight responses, and then to fail early and fail often, so that they learn how to overcome those. And it sounds like your app is designed to do that. What's the name of the app?
It is ST Math, and ST stands for spatial temporal. And the easiest description of using your spatial temporal skills is if you're driving through traffic, let's say you're in the fast lane and you know your exit's coming up in 2 miles, but it's kind of traffic's moving and you've got to find those holes to get off the exit, right? You're using your spatial temporal reasoning. Now, when I go out to schools and I talk with kids, I don't tell them about driving through traffic because it kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense to them. But I talk to them about getting to the lunch line first, and they have to navigate through the crowds, and they get that, they understand that. And yeah, it's really interesting that you brought up the problem solving because, well, mine's mission is to ensure that all children are mathematically equipped to solve the world's most challenging problems. Our games are visual. All children. We are actually in the very beginning stages of trying to discover ways that we can make these visual games accessible to sight-impaired students. And we have a long road ahead of us. That's a pretty major challenge in any kind of visual form when you look at the complexity of our games. And for example, the feedback, every incorrect answer that someone could give to the 1+1 question, we have to work into the software and design into the software. If you decided that 1+1 was 7, we would have to give you the visual feedback of 1+1 = 7 and show you why that's incorrect through sound.
That's what I was studying in my grad program, was interactive audio design, and it's a challenge in all sorts of different ways. Audio is the most important thing for immersion and engagement, but we're not used to receiving the bulk of our feedback orally. And so, if I could offer any off-the-cuff recommendations, it would be look at video games. There's been a lot of video games built to support the vision impaired. In fact, there are games out there that are only played orally.
You actually were sharing one with me, something about a room, a dark room?
Yes, a friend of mine, Amir Rajan, created an iOS game called A Dark Room. It's based off an HTML-based game called A Dark Room. He ported the content to iOS. It was eventually #1 in the App Store, and he suspects that it was largely because the game was accessible to the vision impaired community. The sighted community could use it and play it, and it was incredibly immersive because of the story and even the sound in there. But the vision impaired could use it because it was accessible. And iOS is an incredible platform with those kind of guided access technologies.
It's interesting that you're talking about accessibility kind of as a whole, because it's one of the things that this community, the user experience community, the information architecture community, the UX design community, is super, super focused on. Because all of us as designers know that, yes, we're doing good work, but man, we could do so much better. There's so many disabilities and so many things that people aren't aware of. There's actually some courses we were talking today in one of the sessions about digital learning, and there's actually courses on lynda.com that are done by Derek Featherstone on UX accessibility, and they're fantastic because they introduce you as a practitioner to some of these experiences and some of these things that maybe you've never heard of, or you've heard of in a grand scale, but not in, like, blindness would be a grand scale, but vision impaired is a different level, a different scale. And he actually, in some of his coursework, in some of his courses, gives you as a designer a way to look at something by imposing that impairment on yourself. And let me tell you, it makes you think.
So at your company, I assume, with this notion of all children, then of course we need to create a version for the children who can't use the version that we have. And I think that's commendable and awesome. How do you think other companies can approach that? How do we then go about convincing our clients or our company, if we work there, that designing for those various disabilities is worthwhile, is financially prudent, is ethically an absolute? Like, how do we get around doing that?
Right. It's interesting when people talk about accessibility and they relate it to edge cases or fringe populations, right? There's probably disabilities sitting in this room that you're not aware of, right? That's that whole idea of the A to Z of accessibility, is that not all disabilities are obvious. So the thing that we all kind of have to keep track of is sometimes we're temporarily impaired, right? You and I were talking before the segment about some of the surgeries we've had, and I was on a foot scooter a while back ago, or a knee scooter because of my foot a while back ago, and you find accessibility issues all over the place for those temporary impairments, right? And yet there are people that live with these impairments day in and day out. And the other factor, and I think that this is the one that starts to resonate with our corporate stakeholders, at some point, we're all going to get there. And wouldn't we rather design our environment than have to thump through what's given to us?
Yeah.
Like, what if everything was a knob and not a pull chain? We'd be sitting around in the dark.
Well, that's where you get Alexa or Google and get a smart bulb.
Assuming Alexa can understand you. When we got our Echo, it was so funny. My husband works out of town during the week, so he comes home on weekends. When we got our Echo, my daughter and I both like country music, which my husband detests. And he came home one weekend and he says, "Alexa, play music," and it started playing Blake Shelton. And my husband was like, "You poisoned Alexa."
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you. Really enjoyed chatting with you about the things you're passionate about and about the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining us here at Inside the Big Design Studio 2018. I'm Brandon Ward with Project UX. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks.